Hi, I'm Ross Gibbons of God Consent Podcast, and I am here to present today a reading of an article that I had promised in the last podcast I would go ahead and do. It is, as I get back up here, Neither Sword Nor Shield, Full Spectrum Civilian Disarmament by William Norman Grigg. Now you might hear a noise in the future here, in the short future. I have my iPod down here for a 10-minute alarm because this camera shuts off at 10 minutes. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and go on to this. We need to make it clear, fulminated Patrick Lynch of the New York City Policemen's Benevolent Association, that if someone lifts even a finger against a police officer, their life could be on the line. Taken literally, this would make a capital offense out of a familiar disrespectful gesture, a salute that is entirely appropriate when directed at officious tax grazers of Lynch's ilk. It is scarcely an exaggeration to say that Lynch perceives criticism of the police as a species of crime. A little more than a decade ago, Lynch, whose surname appears to be one of God's little in-jokes, attempted to manufacture public outrage over Bruce Springsteen's song, American Skin, 41 Shots. The ballad described the death of an unarmed African immigrant, Amadou Diallo, which I'm hoping to pronounce that right, who was perforated by 19 bullets fired by New York PD officers in a perfectly avoidable eruption of gunfire. The officers were pursuing a rapist, and Diallo, who, like countless other slightly built young black men, vaguely resembled the suspect, supposedly provoked an outburst of contagious gunfire by reaching into his pants to retrieve his ID. Springsteen's song was uniformly denounced as successors to NWA's "Fuck the Police," by a legion of opportunist pundits who apparently hadn't actually heard it. However, Springsteen's lyrics displayed a degree of sympathy for the four street crimes unit who killed Diallo after one of them mistook the victim's wallet for a gun. "You're kneeling over his body in a vestibule, praying for his life," sang Springsteen, apparently in reference to actions of Officer Sean Carroll, who wept openly as he administered CPR in a desperate attempt to save Diallo's life. The song certainly reflected the opinion of a needless slaughter of Amadou Diallo was, to an extent, a product of racial profiling. It also captured the grim reality that urban residents often have at least as much to fear from the police as from common street criminals. Lena gets her son ready for school. She says, "On the streets, Charles, you got to understand the rules. If an officer stops you, promise me you'll always be polite and that you'll never ever run away. Promise Mama you'll keep your hands in sight." Whatever the merits of Springsteen's treatment of the Diallo killing, his song didn't depict the officers themselves as deranged predators. However, from the prospect of Lynch and other police union officials, Springsteen had committed a form of lèse-majesté, by focusing on victims of needless police violence. Proving himself to be tone deaf as police dogs are colorblind, Lynch denounced Springsteen for trying to fatten his wallet by reopening the wounds of this tragic case at a time when police officers and community members are in a healing period. Lynch's choice of words are singularly inapt, given the role of a wallet played in Diallo's violent death. Springsteen, like many others, didn't see the need to treat the police as victims of this episode, given that the SCU officers avoided both criminal and civil penalties and suffered no professional consequences. Diallo's parents, on the other hand, had to bury their innocent son. The officers who gunned down Diallo were following legitimate leads in pursuit of an individual who had committed crimes of violence against innocent people. Their actions most likely were products of panic rather than depravity. Still, given that an innocent man died at their hands, the SCU officers should have faced some kind of accountability. It is also worth contemplating the treatment of a civilian would receive were he to shoot and kill a police officer under similar circumstances. In that respect, it's instructive to recall the travails of Corey May, currently imprisoned and at one time sentenced to death for shooting and killing a police officer who broke into his home during a no-knock drug raid at the wrong address. If May had been gunned down as Diallo was, the incident most certainly would have been treated as a tragedy rather than a crime, and the public would have been admonished by the police and their media stenographers not to second-guess brave officers tasked to do dangerous work entitling split-second decisions. No similar official sympathy was ever extended to May, who had to make a split-second decision when dealing with a party of armed strangers who had invaded his home and threatened his family. According to the state, May's action, though purely defensive, amounted to first-degree murder. After all, he, a mundane, I'm not sure if this is Grigg's word here or actually stated by the state or whatever, but I'll use what's actually been read here. A mundane had dared to lift his hand against one of the state's anointed, who are invested with an unqualified license to kill. Recent actions by federal court suggest that while it's perfectly all right for mere mundanes to keep firearms, actually bearing them is a privilege reserved exclusively for the mocking reference to those mockingly referred to by Second Amendment Sentinel David Codrea, as the only ones, that is, the members of the state's enforcement caste. It is actually, and what's coming next in this article actually is something I mentioned in an early one with Attorney Greg Schubert and Officer Stern. Grigg actually does a very good job of explaining what I pretty much saw once I read the case file and all that kind of stuff as well. On December 23rd, the First Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed a civil rights complaint filed by Attorney Greg Schubert of Springfield, Massachusetts, who was disarmed and detained at gunpoint by police officer J.P. Stern while on his way to court. After noticing that Schubert was carrying a concealed pistol, Stern erupted from his vehicle in what was described as a dynamic and explosive manner, racing over and shoving his gun into the attorney's face. After his gun was confiscated, the attorney provided both his Class A gun license and driver's license. Stern kept the gun and told Schubert he would have to retrieve it from the Springfield Police Department. By way of contemptuous parting gesture, Stern insisted he was the only person allowed to carry a weapon on his beat. This would help explain the fact, cited by both Stern and the Circuit Court, that the neighborhood in which the assault took place is a high crime area. Disarming the law-abiding tends to engender rather than extinguish violent crime, of course, but we shouldn't forget that citizen disarmament is carried out for the benefit of rulers, not subjects. A little more than a week earlier, the U.S. District Court of Georgia's Northern District dismissed another civil rights complaint filed by Christopher Ricey in October 2008, Ricey was surrounded by police, forcibly disarmed, and detained for half an hour when he attempted to board the MARTA train, while carrying a concealed firearm. After Ricey was able to produce his license to carry a concealed weapon, his gun was returned to him, but not before a lengthy and potentially lethal encounter with the police. In dismissing Ricey's complaint, Judge Thomas W. Thrash, Jr. described possession of a state-issued fire license as an affirmative defense to, not an element of, the crimes of boarding public transportation with a concealed weapon and carrying a concealed weapon. I want to read that again. In dismissing Ricey's complaint, Judge Thomas W. Thrash, Jr. described possession of a state-issued firearms license as an affirmative defense to, non-element of, the crimes of boarding public transportation with a concealed weapon and carrying a concealed weapon. Somehow, according to the judge, this justifies the action of police detaining and disarming Ricey. I also point out the fact that Ricey here also apparently had a concealed weapons permit, and it doesn't change the fact that apparently it's a crime there's a crime in carrying a concealed weapon. Joe Monroe, Ricey's attorney, points out the decision means that everyone seen carrying a firearm in any place that is prohibited without a license is subject to be stopped, arrested, and prosecuted even if they have a license. In principle, that should apply to police